Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to this afternoon's talk on Brexit and the construction sector. I hope you've got your sandwiches and your little cup of tea ready to join us as we do a bit of a magical mystery tour as to what's been going on with the sector over the last 12 months. I'm Ivani Neville, I head up BKL's property and construction team here at BKL, and I'm joined by my colleague Simon Eaton and by friends of the firm Shamila Mehta from Keystone from Lloyds Bank, who I'll invite to introduce themselves in a moment. So we wanted to run this session as we recognise that construction has always been an incredibly resilient sector, and indeed it was one of the few sectors that were able to keep trading through the pandemic, which brought with it its own changes and challenges, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, the first quarter of 2021 has signalled the strongest rate of output growth across the sector since September 2014, which is amazing really, but we can also see some challenges ahead, which we wanted to talk about. So what we're going to do is to bring together the experience of the clients that we work with within the sector, mixed with our own professional experience too, as the realities of Brexit on importing goods and EU migrant workers really start to kick in. Sorts of questions we're thinking about are, what does it really mean? What are the things our clients really need to start thinking about right now? If you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box. We'll have a little Q&A at the end if anyone's got anything to ask, and I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. Simon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. My name's Simon Eaton. I'm also one of the construction partners at BKL. I look after a number of clients in the construction sector, ranging from tradesmen up to larger groups, and basically I help clients progress, grow their businesses, move on, become more mature businesses. Help them grow and advise them on cash flow, anything to do with the construction sector, CIS, VAT, all those taxes that for people in the construction sector, it's not highest on their list. So that's a bit about myself.
Super. Shamila, do you want to go next?
Hello. So I'm a partner at Keystone Law. I've been practicing immigration law, so UK inbound immigration, for 28 years. And during that time, you'd have thought we'd see lots of ups and downs, which we have done as immigration law and government policy changes. COVID-19 brought about its own border changes, and you'd have thought that immigration would go very quiet, there wouldn't be movement across the world, but actually what we saw was the opposite of that. So we know there's a lot happening in the UK market, particularly in terms of growth of businesses, and there are lots of immigration law changes that appear to be helping with that growth, but it'll be interesting to see what the attendees come back with to us today on that.
Super. And last but no means least, Richie.
Yeah, Richie Coulson. Well, I head up the specialist construction team at Lloyds Bank, which I've done for probably 10 years now. So basically there's 7 of us. We specialise purely in construction with a bit of transport. We look after circa 1,000 customers, turning over 3 to sort of 25, 30 million, looking after their day-to-day banking needs. So from our point of view, it's probably at the sharp end in terms of financing, what's gone on in terms of cash flow, funding, Brexit, and everything else that's gone on probably for the last 18 months.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. So to start with, Richie, you were just mentioning what you've experienced over the last 12 months in the bank. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've experienced, what you saw happening, what you saw the bank responding with as a result of COVID-19?
Like everybody, it was absolutely manic at the start, trying to get the civil loans sorted out. Nobody really knew what the rules were. They were changing daily. So I think, we managed to get a lot of those loans in place, which sort of gave the support to our customers that we wanted, gave everybody some breathing space. And once that sort of mad panic was over, I think the construction industry, as you said, proved itself in terms of how resilient and adaptable they are as a sector. And as a business, which we've always found, you know, it's been a sector that's always had sort of issues and things to overcome, but a great deal of resilience. And what we've seen with the extra liquidity and perhaps the early return to work, where perhaps, you know, they're back up to 70% capacity quite quickly. It's not been as difficult as we anticipated, but a huge amount of work for us and our customers. You know, we've had to communicate with each other all the time. You know, we've had to form closer relationships. We've had to make sure that we're very proactive, our customers are, and we've had that continued dialogue. But it's, I'd say, out of adversity, our customers have done brilliantly in terms of how adaptable they've been compared with some of the other sectors and key markets we have in the bank. And it's enabled us to sort of carry on. You know, we're in a sort of an okay place now. We know where the construction sector is. We're going to talk a bit more about the Brexit issues and labour and materials, legislation, supply chains. But to a certain extent, those issues are always there for us. They've been compounded and magnified. But I think, say, with our customers' assistance and what we've tried to do, you know, working from home and everything else with staff shortages, we've managed to get ourselves in an okay place. We're not complacent. You know, we're only trading out of it. There's a lot to do, but it's been tough. But, you know, our customers have been brilliant in terms of the way they've worked with us, the way they've adapted, the way they've coped with all the different things that they've had to turn their hand to, which they perhaps haven't in the past.
Yeah. What do you think the key lesson that the majority of your clients took from the last 12 months was?
I think planning, communication and timing. You know, make sure you plan. So with a lot of liquidity, you know, cash isn't always a problem. And like all of us, if something's not a problem, you have plenty of other problems to turn your hand to. So sort of don't kick the can down the road. You know, deal with things when they can. Keep people at the bank, your advisors, your customers, keep people informed. Don't run people out of time. Everything's taking longer in COVID world. You know, systems and processes are creaking. People are working in their bedrooms and at home without all the normal tools. And whilst all businesses have adapted well, things aren't as quick. So I think it's being proactive, communicating and giving yourself time to get things done. That's been the key lesson.
Yeah. I mean, I know that a number of my clients were talking about the importance of getting good systems in place. And I mean, Simon and I often have this conversation about the construction sector. It's, you know, get things done, systems can come later. And this was a time when businesses really needed their systems to take, you know, front and foremost. I mean, a lot of construction businesses depend on the finance team overhearing conversations in and around the building, but obviously when people aren't working in the building, it's quite difficult to do that. So the comms have to really step up, don't they? Shamila, what was your experience across the last 12 months? I mean, it must have gone bonkers for you with Brexit coming up and all the COVID issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to go back to your last point though, Mafanwe, it's all been about systems, even on the immigration side. So construction companies, and we'll talk about this in more detail as we go on, but companies needing to now be sponsors in order to bring workers to the UK, and that requires not only obtaining the sponsor license but understanding what sits behind it in terms of compliance. You know, it's having a license given to you by the Home Office so that you can choose the migrant worker that you want to bring to the UK. Amazing. But in return for that trust, being able to show that you are compliant with Home Office guidance, record keeping, reporting, so that our effectively, so that our borders are safe. That's the whole sort of thinking behind that government policy. So it's interesting to see how it's the same concept that's coming up time and again. It's all about planning, as Richie says. It's all about compliance. It's all about, you know, having the records and the systems so that you're ready to go. And on the immigration side, it's also about remaining competitive, so that if you have a sponsor license, then you can hire the people you want without having to think about where they're from and how long it's going to take to get them here to be in situ. And you therefore remain competitive if you've got your license so that you're ready to go as and when you need it. But the referendum and the result of the referendum kind of hit us like a bus in 2016, and our Brexit work started the very next day with Europeans who were employed right across the sector in all sorts of different jobs, wanting to know where they stood. There was understandably at the beginning a lot of anger from Europeans about what had happened, and at one point, so I think from that June, I don't know how many lectures I actually did about immigration law, but I ended up talking to 1,000 people, so audiences, you know, right across different sectors about the subject and what could be done. And actually, as immigration lawyers, we suddenly had to become European immigration lawyers as well as UK immigration lawyers, and so kind of worked with the Home Office on that. But the last 12 months have been interesting because the pandemic has, of course, stopped everyone in their tracks. So everyone's had to stay where they are. You know, if they got stuck in another country, they were just stuck there. But the Home Office has been good. It's recognised this, of course, and there are concessions, COVID concessions. It set up a help desk. So it was, again, a lot about reporting so that they knew where an individual was, or if a company was having difficulties, then, you know, they were able to step in and help out where they could. So it's been a sort of game of two halves, but it almost seems that Brexit came at the right time because we all had to sit still and then Brexit could take place. I'm not sure what it would have been like if we'd just had a normal world and then Brexit happening at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, Simon, I'm interested in your perspective on this, because obviously Shamila's coming from the prepare early, know all the regulations, whereas you work a lot, don't you, Simon, with the smaller side of the sector, the growing part of the construction sector. What's your experience of how they responded or mobilised, or how they're even considering Brexit as an issue right now?
Well, I think to begin with, there was obviously the uncertainty that took place as we went into the COVID period. But I think actually during that period, there was only a small part where the builders merchants were unable to get materials. There was a period where things were delayed. But apart from that, I think most of my clients, bar a few who sort of do work in the hospitality sector on pubs and so forth, they were able to continue to work during this whole period. I think also at the time there was a lot of money and all the government schemes which were introduced to help. As Richie alluded to, there was most businesses have got more cash now than I think they've probably ever had in terms of furlough claims, job retention scheme, VAT deferral, bounce back loans, CBILS loans. And I think actually during this period, Brexit, like Shmulett said, came out. It seemed to just happen and take place. And I think people thought actually it'd be fine, we'll deal with it in the new year. And I think that's actually what happened. I think there was a lot of talk about what was going to happen with tariffs on imported materials, but actually the agreement that took place with that worked out well for supply chains. Also think with the postponed VAT accounting, that has also helped businesses who instead of having to pay VAT up front and reclaim it, are now able to account for it on their own VAT returns. So I think in that sense, I think it's been very positive as a sector. As I say, apart from the short period, things have sort of continued relatively normal, which has been great for most of my clients, really.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think definitely the sense that I've been getting as well, you know, let's deal with it when we have to. Let's see until it smacks us in the face, and then we'll work out what we're supposed to do with it next. And certainly that's a bit of a sense that we've been trying to work towards, talking to the sector a bit more about the things that are coming up. I mean, in terms of right now, what are we finding at the moment in terms of where the sector is creaking back into action? I know that the first quarter of 2021, I think, was the fastest growing that the sector's experienced since 2014. I was reading an article the other day. Richie, are you noticing anything in particular about what's going on right now? What kind of deals are going on?
I think where we are, it's and something we're talking to our customers about all the time, is kind of like the perfect storm. So we're seeing activity pick up, contracts are available. At the same time, we know that the costs of a lot of materials have gone up, some astronomically, and so is sort of labour and skilled labour. So the slight concern is, having had all this cash, as we all know, it doesn't take many contracts, and you've got to go and find the materials, you've got to go and find the labour force. It might coincide at a time when one of your customers pays you slowly, or your suppliers want cash. And when those things come together, that's when it's going to get tight again. So there's that slight nervousness amongst our customers that, you know, if it all falls at the wrong time, suddenly that nice cushion of cash they had isn't going to be enough. Then they're sort of back talking to us about what they can do about it. So it's really a case of just looking at the way businesses are financed. Are they financed in the correct way? Are you looking at all your assets, whether your plant, your machinery, looking at your invoicing? You know, have you still got that flexibility when some of the government loan scheme money starts to run out? And to say, with the increased costs and reducing margins, it's a bit of maybe a bit of a false position that we all find ourselves in, you know, for us and our customers. And we just really want to have that cash flow conversation. But as you start to trade out of this, there's clearly going to be opportunities for those who can seize them, get the labour, get the materials, you know, and get the margins right on the contracts. But it's being in that position then, rather than perhaps the one you're in now. So it's they're the conversations we're having, and they're the ones the customers are asking us about. You know, when this money runs out, can I come and get some more? Not necessarily. So that's, you know, it's renewing these loans. Bearing in mind the bounce backs were done without our involvement. You know, you could do that online. We don't know the circumstances under which you've got a bounce back loan. So to renew it, we're starting from scratch. Obviously, a lot of our customers we've known for many years and have a relationship with, and because we're talking to them, it's quicker. But again, it goes back to planning and timing. You know, don't phone us when you've got the opportunity to, you know, seize a contract on the other end of the phone. So it's, that's just something we're mindful of, and we're trying to talk to the customers about, and sort of, and our customers are bringing us about, saying, you know, how do I perpetuate this level of liquidity? Because, you know, it makes us feel good and gives them opportunity. So that's where we're at now, I think. As Simon was saying, a lot of people have got more cash than they've ever had, but as we all know, it sort of runs out very quickly when you get sort of a call on it from sort of 2 or 3 different areas.
Yeah. Are you finding that size has an influence on that as well? I mean, I was reading an article the other day about the larger construction businesses stockpiling stuff, and the smaller ones not being able to get hold of things. Is that something that you're finding affects the cash flow conversations you're having, or not?
Oh, absolutely. Our customers will know, you know, a lot of these imported materials, you know, 60% comes from the EU, you know, most of that is already pre-purchased. You know, it's not coming in and sitting around for people to go, it's already sold. So, you know, the lead times are 6 to 8 weeks. So that's where the planning comes in, and you've got to have cash to do that. So yeah, we're finding the supply chains compounded by, you know, shipping issues, and COVID. You know, nobody quite knows to what extent it's the Brexit paperwork and the Brexit issue, the COVID issue, or just naturally, you know, increase in pricing. You know, again, it's compounded by the fact that the sector's busy and there's, you know, a lot of projects going on. So all those things coming together, yeah, it's giving people concerns, and it just squeezes the margins on the jobs. That impacts on the profitability, that impacts on the way we view a customer and their credit scores, and then it impacts on the speed that we can make decisions. So it has a bigger rounded impact. So that's, yeah, all these things, you know, have a knock-on effect, and say our customers and the audience out there will know, I'm sure, you know, it's stockpiling and planning is the only way you're going to get these things done effectively.
Yeah, and I was surprised to find that it's actually, to some extent, it's a knock-on effect from the first lockdown, when all the factories shut down in the EU, the production factories, they shut down for a few weeks, and it's still working its way through the system. It's crazy how long the supply chain has become across the sector. I don't know if that's something you've noticed, Simon.
Generally, I mean, as Richie was saying, there's a lot of confidence in the market at the moment. I mean, I think the levels of residential and commercial are booming at the moment. And with that, there's obviously been the issues with supply chains, which is leading to increased prices. I think, which is a big thing. I mean, I've got a timber importer who was saying the price of plywood has increased by 40%, which is all going to follow through to increased prices. Similarly, you've got a shortage of sort of steel, timber, other sort of commodities, and I'm just not sure whether that's a Brexit thing or whether it's a COVID thing or not. And definitely that will affect, I think, further down the line, definitely with increased prices.
Definitely. Shamila, what are you finding at the moment in and across the sector?
Well, I think it's quite interesting to hear Richie and Simon talking about supply chains and materials and liquidity, and how well this is going and how many contracts there are, etc., etc. That's all fabulous, but there is a cliff edge approaching when it comes to labour, because of course can't do anything unless you have the people to actually do the work. And so I think, again, this is around planning. There's not long to go. So really, one of my key messages today is to companies: don't forget that on the 30th of June 2021, that is the very last day that anyone who's in the UK and who is an EU national can apply for status to be here lawfully. So from the 1st of July, which isn't that far away at all, employers, construction companies, will need to carry out right to work checks on their labour force. And for an individual who isn't able to prove their legal status, it's not going to be possible, probably, for that employer to continue to employ them. If they do, then they could face a Home Office penalty for employing an illegal worker of up to £20,000 per worker. So there are lots of really good news stories around immigration and how the government has understood where there are shortages, in the different sort of job types, and they've covered those off really, really well with the new immigration scheme. So that's great on the one side, but on the other side we have EU workers who may not have applied for status before the deadline, and we've got this check that's got to be done by employers to ensure that their workers do have the legal right to work here. So really big message out there for employers just to be aware of this.
And what does the check entail, Shamila? Tell us a bit more about what that means in practice.
So a right to work check has to be carried out by all employers on all prospective employees, and that has to be done before the first day of work, or at the very least on the first day of work. So we will all have had a right to work check carried out, and effectively it is a check of your passport, so the photo page of your passport, because that gives the nationality of the individual, and where that person is either from overseas or from Europe in the future. From the 1st of July, that employer will be checking to make sure that they have status. So from overseas, that would be by way of a visa. So it might be a biometric residence permit. Or if they are from the EU, then employers have got to understand how to apply for a share code from the individual and then use the Home Office platform, because that platform will tell the employer whether that individual has applied for status and what status they have. And the importance of this process, even to the individual European, is that they will need that to open a UK bank account. Richie will confirm that. They'll also need that to rent property, They need that to apply for a driving license. So we've moved on, and government has gone digital in many respects. So now, instead of having to show your paperwork, effectively, you can share this code with various parties, and those parties can then check on your status.
Right, gosh, that's a huge change, isn't it? It's a significant amount of work for the sector to take on, and especially when we've just said a moment ago that systems are not always a strong point
Exactly.
of the sector. I don't know, Simon,
Right.
you, yeah.
I was just going to add in there that you've also got the introduction of the off-payroll rules, the IR35 checks that have been brought into the private sector from this year, which I think a lot of the bigger businesses have spent a bit more time looking into, but I think it will be more sort of prevalent to the sort of medium-sized businesses when HMRC do start having more checks. Obviously, there's a few high-profile cases going on at the moment. I won't mention any names of any footballers, but obviously that will then apply to the construction sector as well. I think as a whole, there's been sort of a long use of subcontractors as opposed to putting people through the payroll. So I think it's an area that HMRC will sort of target a bit further. There's also been some new sort of rules and changes in respect of the CIS from this year, which again give HMRC more powers in respect of CIS.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about that, Simon, on the CIS side?
It's basically just, I mean, CIS is quite complicated. There's a lot of nuances, which a lot of it's quite hard for people to actually look at and make decisions. It's never clear cut. I think in terms of the rules that have come in, HMRC are allowed to offset. So basically, when you have CIS suffered, you can offset it from PAYE and CIS deductions that the companies make. From April this year, HMRC have the power, if they decide that there isn't any evidence to back up these deductions, that they will not allow the CIS to be offset. And also they can then stop any future offsets in the same year. So it could potentially, from a cash flow point of view, if people are not operating it correctly, be quite detrimental.
Yeah, gosh, and it feels like there's a lot of closing in on all angles on the sector. Really, it's a real call to step up and to really plan ahead. I mean, Richie, you mentioned planning earlier. I mean, how aware are you of what your clients or the business that you're working with are doing to prepare themselves for these changes?
I think they're doing pretty much all they can. It's difficult, and it's always something you haven't done, if you like. But in terms of preparedness, they're still making things happen. They're filling in the paperwork. Yes, it's slowing things down. They're using advisors, which we'd encourage them to do, and people to help them with it, because it's not straightforward. They're sort of coping with it, but it's putting a burden on them. But I believe they're doing it okay, because they have to. Otherwise, they're not going to get things done in terms of imports. They're not going to get things done in terms of their labour force. If they don't fill in the necessary paperwork, it won't happen. So the danger is when you get to a deadline like the 30th of June and you haven't done it, and then people start panicking, and of course it falls at a time when you've got many other things to deal with. So again, it's not running yourself out of time or putting it off, but people are doing it. But we do find there's always a mad panic near the deadline of everything, whether it's getting a loan, getting something to us. But yeah, it's happening, but it's always near deadline time that there's a nervousness amongst our customers.
That's right. I was chatting to one of my clients this morning, and they said, do you know what, until it smacks us in the face, we're not going to do anything about it. I was like, okay, good, all right. But it really is about sort of really thinking ahead, really, isn't it?
There was a question online which I just answered to. Somebody said, what are we looking for when somebody comes for more lending? The questions, if you like, that come from credit are far wider than they've ever been. So there's a whole section on sustainability. There's a whole Brexit section. Apart from being able to service and repay the facilities, which we've got to get comfortable with input from our customers.
So when somebody's coming and asking us for additional facilities, we'd be asking them what they've done in terms of Brexit preparation, paperwork. Why do they feel they're comfortable? Have they had any advice? In the same way we talk to them about their sustainability credentials. So again, where it's a case of, you know, we can lend you X and if you can repay it, you can have it. If you can't tick the sustainability box or the Brexit box, we don't move on. So there's a lot more information we need to gather from customers. And that slows the process down because it creates questions. A lot of them are driven externally by compliance. You know, it's not the bank's making, so we've got to make sure that we cover all the bases. So any sort of request, pretty much for anything, especially lending, we'll ask all those questions about Brexit, paperwork, systems, processes, pretty much everything. And then when you try to open an account, you know, they'll ask it again. So everything is taking a long time, which is why we go back to my planning, communication, don't run things to the wire.
Yeah.
And use your external advisors and specialists and friends and family and peers and, you know, people within the construction sector and groups, and you get, and just to make sure you've covered all the bases, because there's an overwhelming amount of stuff that has to be done, you know, being driven by Brexit.
That's really good advice. Shamila, I was thinking the same, you know, in terms of you must have some recommendations for the sector to put in place now to make sure that they're ready for the cliff edge, as you described it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is complicated, it is messy, and these things take time. So and there's no getting around that. I wish there was a quick and easy answer. You know, so I think we have to build kind of patience into this, and we have to also be aware that it's not only just complicated and messy for us as advisors and for the companies, but it's also messy at the Home Office end as well. Because they don't, you know, they have been bombarded, they are overrun with work, and COVID-19 hasn't helped that. But yes, it's all in the planning, and I think probably a strong recommendation would be to have someone in the company just accept that they're going to have to deal with this and sort of face it rather than put it on the back burner. It's just irritating and annoying and the rest of it, but we have to face it. And the things we're going to have to face are who have we got who's a European worker at the moment? Have they applied for legal status in the UK? What can we do to help them if they haven't? What are we going to do if they choose not to apply? Because there are employment law implications around that as well. You know, how do we dismiss, how do we terminate employment? And also, so that's the EU workers who are already here, but also talent management, talent pipeline, or just labour pipeline. You know, who are we looking to bring? Where are they based at the moment? Are there enough workers in the UK already, and can we tap into that pool? But if not, where are we having to look? And if it is that they're going to be coming from the EU, then, you know, we've got to accept there is going to be a timetable around that. It's not going to be instant from Germany or from Poland any longer. It's going to be an application by the company for a sponsor license in order to sponsor migrants, first of all. And after that, choosing the individual, giving them a certificate of sponsorship, so effectively giving them their work permit, and then having to apply for a visa to come to the UK. They've got to then plan around their dependents and relocating a whole family. Wow. We then start looking at start dates and end dates of employment. Also, bear in mind, there are added costs to hiring overseas nationals. So there are Home Office fees, there are if you like, government levies. There's an immigration health surcharge because everyone has to contribute to the NHS. There are other charges that there's another one called the immigration skills charge, which the government levies on all employers bringing migrants to the UK. So, you know, there's got to be budgeting and financial planning. And at the end of last year, I was saying, you know, you've got to plan at least 6 months in advance for all of this. So last year, HR teams were having to look at what their talent pipelines were looking like, certainly for the coming 6 months, because we didn't know what was going to happen with EU nationals and this 30th of June deadline. So I would apply the same principle again, and really now we should be looking at the sort of hires for at least the next 6 months, if not longer. So really that would be my key recommendation. It's all about planning. It's painful and it is complicated, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah. And what about the situation where you aren't directly employing the individuals, but they're employed by a contractor who you work with? I mean, that's going to be a big issue for a lot of businesses in the sector. So what can our clients do in that situation?
It is messy, and the cleanest way I've found to deal with this is where the company is working with a subcontractor, then there should be a contract for services. So where you have an employee, it's a contract of services, but for a subcontracting company where you're working with contractors, then they're third parties and you should have a contract for services. So what that does is effectively protect the company, because it means they are not responsible for the subcontractors who come on site. What you do is in the contract for services have a clause that effectively says, anyone you send on site to us, you are responsible for their right to work. You are responsible for checking, because we're not employing them. That's not an obligation that falls on us. And if you have that in place, I tend to find that effectively gets the company off the hook, because you're only responsible as a company for the people you employ, not for subcontractors.
Yeah.
I know that's not easy. It's not easy in construction, particularly because you know, labour is much more sort of free flowing and temporary. But it's important because the Home Office has now, with effect from December 2020, has now got back into service its enforcement teams. So they are enforcing the immigration rules, whereas they hadn't suspended, but the impact was they'd suspended enforcement in 2020.
Yeah. And I suppose, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we'll push the responsibility back on the subcontractor, but if you also haven't got someone to do your work, what right would our clients have to go and check the audit that their subcontractors have done, would you say?
So I would say that probably in that same contract for services, you can have a provision whereby you have the right to ask for documentary evidence that the people coming on site will have the legal right to work. So it's a very fine line, because you don't want to take responsibility, but you want to be protected all at the same time. Yeah. So I think that's one certainly to, you know, just run past a legal advisor, probably an employment lawyer as opposed to an immigration lawyer, just to cover that element off.
Do you know, as I've got you chatting about this now, we've got a couple of questions here. Do you mind if I ask you them?
Yeah, sure.
So, Tusha Miller, do you think Labour in the UK can support the construction sector post 30th of June if we can't get enough resource from overseas? I think that's probably a general question as much as for you, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. So from the government side, I have to say, and I don't say this very often, but I have been quite impressed. Because in order to bring either an EU worker or an overseas worker to the UK in construction and in any sector, you have to find the right code for them. And the code appears in this document called Appendix SOC codes, standard occupation codes. And I was just having a quick look through before the webinar and just making a note thinking, you know what, there's not going to be enough. There aren't going to be all the codes that we need in construction. But can I say I am pretty impressed. Construction managers, civil engineers, carpenters, quantity surveyors, bricklayers, plumbers, project managers, planning engineers, engineering technicians, pipe fitters, welders, electrical contractors, they're all there. They're all there. So the message from government is, if you need to hire in any of those roles, it is available to you to employ from within the UK, and please go ahead and employ UK nationals. But if there aren't the people here, then you are free to go out to Europe or to go overseas, as long as you meet the requirements for the minimum salaries, minimum hourly rate. You can sponsor individuals from anywhere in the world to do the job.
Just to add to that, I think a lot of EU workers, the number working in London has been sort of reducing since 2018. A lot of workers have returned to their native countries. I think we are, obviously with COVID as well, that's sort of increased the pressures more on the labour market. I think I was chatting to a client this morning, and they're definitely seeing the day rates of both the skilled and unskilled workers are increasing. So it will be a key how having access to that skilled and unskilled workers.
Absolutely. And again, it all goes to the planning. So there are the solutions, there are the mechanisms to achieve what needs to be achieved, but don't leave it too late, because all these things take time.
That's right. That seems to be what's coming out from the whole conversation, isn't it? It's about planning, it's about conversations, it's about thinking ahead, and it's about systems. Is what I seem to be hearing from all of us here, really. Bit of a unanimous message, I think. I mean, in terms of questions, we've already answered Belinda's question, which is around whether it's our responsibility to check our agency or not. So, Shamila, I think you've already answered that one. Last words, chaps, chapesses. Any last words? We're coming to the end of the session now. Any last thoughts you want to leave people with for today? Richie?
I would just say, as I've said before, talk to your advisors, speak to your bank. Don't go for radio silence. Just keep them updated on where your business is at and what's happening, because it enables them to plan and come up with some thoughts and ideas as well that you may not have thought of. So just make sure you continue to communicate with your bank, and make sure that when you are ready to request something, you can provide them with all that information, and just be prepared, say, for the time thing. But they're a resilient bunch, the construction sector, and they sort of led the country back to work, and we're expecting great things. And I'm sure everybody's bank and everybody around them want to support them, and they just give us time and try and plan it, even when it doesn't seem like it's a priority.
Super. Simon?
Yeah, I know we've talked about a lot of challenges that are going on in the market at the moment. I think overall it's quite an exciting time as well. There's a lot of work and a lot of opportunities in the market. We've talked about CIS. We didn't even talk about the domestic reverse charge for VAT. I think on the flip side of that, one area we haven't touched on is I'm seeing a lot more sort of research and development claims, as there's a lot of innovation and advancement. So we are seeing more and more claims going in, those that have the qualified criteria for sort of technology and scientific advancement. So as the sort of new techniques are evolving, especially we haven't even touched on sustainability, but again, with the innovation that's happening there is scope for sort of R&D tax claims, which again, customers in the construction scheme should be aware of.
And Shamila, I know we've heard a lot already on your recommendations.
I would say look for or nominate a sort of subject matter expert. Look for a super user in your organization, someone who is going to take responsibility for the whole sort of employment, immigration, compliance piece, because it's not possible just to take the advice and then get on with it and expect your advisors to make sure you comply. Compliance comes down to you, and you want to hang on to your license. You do not want to have it suspended or revoked by the Home Office. So a super user is the way to go.
Super, thank you. So thank you very much, everyone. That was really, really helpful, really informative, really lively conversation there as well. I think there's lots to take away there. So thank you to everybody for joining. Thank you for sharing your sandwich with us this afternoon, and feel free to get in touch with any one of us if you've got any other questions or any thoughts that you'd like to add to that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.